Howdy historians, how you doing? Mr. Montgomery here, coming to you with a flip lesson for Unit 2, Part 1. Unit 2, the North American colonies in the context of the Atlantic world is what we're going to be checking out for the unit. Part 1 is about European colonization. So that is what we've got in store for you today. Some of you have your lecture outlined because you've been in class with me, some of you do not. So I just want to hop over real quick to our topics page. All right, so again, if you go to your class page, AP US History, you go to your hour, go down to Unit 2, North American Societies in the Atlantic World, and you'll see a bunch of assignments up here. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. And if you go into the resource section and click on Lecture Outline, this will go ahead and pop up for you. So this is the chunk that we're going to be talking about today. Unit 2, Part 1, European colonization. We'll take a very brief look at the Spanish and Dutch, more in-depth on the French, and then just a couple general ideas for the British as we go through this key concept here about colonization, migration patterns, etc., etc. So that is the lesson overview for the day. So I have the lecture outline out as it'll help you stay organized as we go through and take notes. And without any more fanfare or ado, let's go ahead and hop into it. So hopefully you have the big title written into your notes for the unit. And now we'll get into Part 1, European colonization, the good old flags of all of our various European colonizers here, which I always knew from playing FIFA growing up, FIFA soccer. That has helped me learn the flags. But these are our four major players. Let's get into some details. Now, for the Spanish, we're not going to sit here and recap everything that we learned about in Unit 1. Right? In Unit 1, we know that the Spanish are in the Americas and they create their massive empire in what is today the Southwest United States, Central America, and South America. Now, one note that I do want to make, we talked about it a little bit in Unit 1 with the Spanish, but I want to reiterate it here. The Spanish are the first to the Americas. Right? Why were they the first? Why weren't the English, the French, the Dutch over here first? They were the first because they were united. All right, a lot of other countries were dealing with problems back home, domestic problems. A lot of it was religious unrest. The Spanish were all Catholic. They were united under Ferdinand and Isabella. So they went out and they explored first. And again, they were the trendsetters. We talked about them a lot. They show everyone that you can make money over here in the New World. And then everybody else follows suit and starts coming over and starts to carve out their piece of the pie in North America. The French are going to be incredibly important for the early stages of American history. Now, the French are going to get settled up in modern-day Canada. Just going to grab this map here real quick, make sure I've got it in the front of everything else. All right, so you can see that France, in the blue, has this massive territory here. All right, the English or Great Britain are in the pink, more of the orange are the Spanish, and then you have some disputed territory in the purple, which we'll talk about a lot as we move through this unit and some of the wars that the English and the French fight for it. Now, the first French colony is Quebec. You can see it right here. Quebec is founded in 1608 by Samuel de Champlain, nicknamed Father of New France. He picked a good location here along the St. Lawrence River, and that's where France is going to gain its foothold in North America and start developing a civilization. Here's Samuel de Champlain, kind of like a poor man's Johnny Depp. All right, so he establishes Quebec in the year 1608. Now, the French government is going to be under the strict control of the monarch back home. So New France is not going to have a lot of freedom and democracy like the English will when they establish the English colonies. So that's something that's going to be a major difference. No elected representative assemblies, no traditional rights like voting or trial by jury. Instead, the French government in the New World very strictly controlled by the monarchs and their ministers back home. The population in New France is going to grow relatively slowly, and there's a couple reasons why. One reason is because the climate is harsh. It's cold, right? And most people don't want to move to a colder climate. They want to go somewhere warmer, and in North America, it's actually much colder than Europe, even at similar lines of latitude. Basically, Europe has warm air that gets picked up over the Gulf of Mexico and then gets dropped onto their continent from basically the way that the winds work over the ocean. So they get a nice warm Gulf Stream that keeps them warmer than areas at similar latitude in North America. Actually, Quebec and Paris are at pretty similar lines of latitude, and Paris has a much higher average temperature because they get that warm air that's picked up over the equator and then pushed over all of Western Europe. So the harsh climate limits immigration. Another big reason why immigration was limited is because the French didn't allow any Protestants to move to the New World. Now, the French were having some pretty major wars at home between Catholics and Protestants. The monarchs of France were Catholic. They favored Catholics. And the French Protestants, they were called Huguenots, were the disliked group, and they were being suppressed back in France. If the French would have allowed the Protestants to go, the Huguenots to go, their population could have grown more quickly because, again, they wanted to get out of there. They were not the favored group, but instead the French government said, listen, we don't want any problems in the New World, so we're only going to allow Catholics to immigrate there. And that was a backfire that actually limited their immigration. They should have pushed the disgruntled people out of France to New France, and they could have had their population grow faster, but they thought there'd just be more problems if they allowed the Protestants to move to New France. So they said it was Catholic-only immigration. So Catholic-only immigration and a harsh climate limited the population growth. Also, once you got there, the economy basically revolved around fur trapping. So the people that came to New France were there to fur trap, which is very difficult, very dangerous work. So there also weren't a lot of economic opportunities. Plus, fur trapping is new. There weren't a lot of people back in Europe who knew how to hunt. So because of that, they didn't go to the New World because there were limited economic opportunities in New France. Their economy revolved around fur trapping. Meant they had to be on good terms with Native Americans, who were a vital link to the trade, but in general that also limited the population growth of New France. Another group that comes over besides fur trappers are Jesuit missionaries. People like Father Marquette came over. The Jesuits worked endlessly to convert natives. They didn't do a lot of converting, but what they did do is provide a lot of great maps. They were very good cartographers and map makers as they traveled across the continent trying to convert people. So although the Jesuit missionaries were not very successful in conversions, they were very successful in coming back with geographic knowledge, good maps, and just general information about the lay of the land, who's friendly, who's not, information about food, animals, stuff like that. Let's see, what else with the French? I mean, really what we're going for here, the big ideas, they don't have self-government. They're on good relations with the natives. They do fur trapping. There's Jesuit missionaries going out there and mapping. There's a very limited population growth. And eventually, we can see here, grab this map again, we can see that the French and the English colonies are neighbors, right? They butt up against each other. They're going to eventually fight for a lot of land, and that's going to cause a lot of problems and be a lot of the factors that eventually cause some of the seeds of revolution to grow in the colonies. So the French, not a lot of self-government, friendly with natives, fur trapping, map making, hanging out with a pretty large empire, eventually going to be some hostility, population is growing slow. All right, so those are the big ideas for the French. Now the Dutch, they're going to show up, and they're going to be in the New World for a relatively small amount of time. We didn't even see them on the map that we looked at. The only area that they really had in North America was New York, which used to be called New Amsterdam. So around 1623, they start to establish New Amsterdam. They were very interested in fur trading. The Dutch thought that's where they'd be able to make their money in North America. They had some pretty big possessions in the Caribbean. They had some pretty big possessions in Southeast Asia that they were making a lot of money off. The Dutch East Indies Company was very profitable. Their Caribbean, the West Dutch Indies Company was very profitable. So then they thought they could also make some money on the fur industry. So they set up New Amsterdam. And again, they're there for profits. There's no freedom of religion, no freedom of speech, no democratic practices. They were very aristocratic, and they were there to try to cash in on the fur trade, founding New Amsterdam in 1623. But the colony was not very well run, and it had some major defensive problems. The Dutch were not friendly with Native Americans, so they were constantly under attack from natives. Eventually, they had to build giant walls around the main street of their colony. That's actually where Wall Street gets its name, because it was a defensive wall erected by the Dutch to try to keep the natives out. So that's where Wall Street in New York City gets its name. It's from the Dutch literally building walls around the major street in their colony. And they had trouble basically getting going. They had trouble gaining a foothold. They never made much money off the fur trade. They weren't very well organized. The Dutch government back home didn't really care about them too much because they were making so much money in the Caribbean and in Southeast Asia. And eventually, the English took over the area in 1664. The English just surrounded New Amsterdam in 1664 and said, we can fight or you can just give it up. And the Dutch said, we will just give it up, no thank you. And New Amsterdam became New York, named after King Charles II's brother, the Duke of York. The King Charles II was the king back in England. The English take it over. They rename it New York after King Charles' brother. So not a lot of big influence from the Dutch. They named Wall Street, very aristocratic atmosphere. They had named a couple other things like Harlem and Brooklyn, but the Dutch were here just for like a hot minute, and then they were out. Okay, so not a lot of huge influence. The French we'll talk about a lot. We've already talked about the Spanish a lot. Dutch, done. Really don't ever come back to them. Now, for the English, we're going to talk about England a lot. We're going to talk a lot about the English because they're the ones that really eventually lay down what will become the United States with the colonies. What I want to talk about here just for a minute are some of the reasons why the English start coming to the New World. Now, just like the French, they're slow to colonize because they had some religious turmoil back home. They had fighting between Protestants and Catholics. They were kind of going back and forth and flip-flopping about are they Protestant, are they Catholic, kind of depending on what monarch was in place. But eventually the Church of England, the Anglican Church, will be the prominent church. And as England starts to stabilize and there's less fighting back home, they also will turn their attention to creating colonies in North America. So what I just want to get here are the causes of English immigration to the New World in the 1600s. One big idea is the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Now, the Spanish Armada is just the Spanish Navy. In 1588, the English defeated the Spanish Armada in a big naval battle. It had to deal with a European war that we don't need to get into here. But it was after that that the English started to feel confident sailing the high seas. Before this, they thought that if they sailed to the New World, the Spanish would just capture their ships and capture their sailors. But after the English defeat the Spanish Armada in 1588, this opened the door. Now the English are the most powerful navy in the world, and they control the routes to the New World. So they're more confident, they're unified, they want to proudly promote their interests around the world, and they're starting to have more peace at home, and now they control the high seas. So the defeat of the Spanish Armada gives them that confidence to go out and explore. Another thing that's going on in England is there's a huge population boom at this time. In the year 1550, there were 3 million people in England. By 1600, there were 4 million people in England. And again, this goes back to the Columbian Exchange and all that food that's in the European world now that they've discovered in the Americas. So their population went from 3 million to 4 million in just 50 years, right? So they need to find new opportunities for all of these people. They need space, they need jobs. There also was an economic depression at this time. The number one employer in England in the 1500s was the woolen industry, the textile industry, the industry that makes like fabric and cloth. Well, there was a big depression in the woolen industry starting in the 1500s, so that increased unemployment. So now people want to come to the New World to find some type of economic opportunity. Okay, so they have the confidence after the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Their population is rapidly increasing, and they're having an economic depression. They also have new business methods. There's joint stock companies now where people can pool money together to start a business. They can jointly stock the company with money, joint stock company. So it's easier to start companies, and a lot of the early colonies are colonies. Excuse me, a lot of the early colonies are owned by companies, all right, that are joint stock companies. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit more. There was also an English law called the Law of Primogeniture at this time. It said that only the oldest son was eligible to inherit his father's land, so then all the younger sons had to come make their own fortune in the New World. Land was very scarce in England, so the Law of Primogeniture said only the eldest son can inherit the land, so all the middle and youngest sons are now coming to the New World to try to own land and own wealth. And then the last big cause is there's religious persecution. There are lots of people that are being persecuted in England. You had to be Anglican, and if you weren't Anglican, you wanted to get out. So they defeat the Spanish Armada. They have a huge population boom. The woolen industry is in depression. There's joint stock companies setting up colonies. The law of primogeniture is only allowing the eldest sons to inherit land, and there's lots of religious persecution. So people start coming to the New World from England looking for economic opportunities and for some religious freedom. So we're going to see a lot more information about the English, but that will come later. So these are our four major players: the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the English, and we'll get more of them as we move through.